Condolences to you and the rest of your family for your loss.
Thank you so much.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said what he called the intense phase of fighting Hamas in Gaza is nearly over, allowing troops to be freed up to be deployed to Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where fighting has escalated with the Hezbollah armed group. Now, in his first Israeli media interview since the war in October, Mr. Netanyahu said he expected the ground operation in the southern Gazan city of Rafah to be completed soon. But he said the war wouldn't finish until the group no longer controls the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the UN's children's agency UNICEF has been saying for a while now that there's no safe place for children who are paying the highest price in the war. The charity warned that the effect of the war on Gaza's children would span generations, affecting them both physically and psychologically. Well, now the international charity Save the Children has released new figures suggesting that as many as 21,000 children are missing in Gaza. The organisation estimates that 17,000 children have become separated from their families during the chaos and the conflict, especially during the latest displacements following the Israeli offensive in Rafah. And a further 4,000 are believed to have been trapped beneath the rubble and an unknown number detained or buried in unmarked graves. Well, let's speak to the president of the Middle East Policy Council, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, to discuss all of those issues. Welcome to the programme. There's a lot to get through. We'll come to the humanitarian situation and the children in a minute, but I just want to ask you about today's talks in Washington to begin with. It seems like we talk about a deal being around the corner. What do you think might be substantive in this particular visit from Mr. Gallant, Israel's defence minister?
Well, thank you. As your earlier guest mentioned, of course, there's a lot of fence mending to be done by the minister in response to the prime minister's public statements critical of President Biden, making very clear his hesitation about accepting the ceasefire that originated from Israel. So all of that has got to be navigated, in addition to everyone getting on the same page about the arms transfers that are indeed coming from the United States to Israel, because the border conflict with Lebanon and Hezbollah is definitely heating up.
And do you think that is a huge concern then across the corridors of power in Washington?
Absolutely. We've heard from the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff's warning that a possible Israeli incursion into Lebanon could not only bring a response from Hezbollah, but a response from Iran itself, and the difficulties that that would likely bring to U.S. forces in the region. President Biden is approaching an election. It is a very difficult time to have this conflict in the region, and certainly one that brings in U.S. forces, American lives in danger, and to a greater extent is going to be something that to be avoided at all costs.
Indeed, and let's return to what we were discussing just then, which is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, hearing from UNICEF that there's no safe place for children who are paying the highest price in the war. That remains a huge concern, of course, not just amongst people in the region, but again, where you are in Washington.
Yes. Yes, it is part of the great challenge for the American administration, for President Biden, to balance the continued support for the state and the people of Israel in the face of these costs to the civilians in the Gaza Strip, particularly children, but civilians in general, the devastation of infrastructure, indeed their very futures. And we are cognizant of that. Americans are paying attention to that. It's in our press, it's in our media, and people want the president as best he can to help find a solution to it. Unfortunately, it is not in his hands. It is in the hands of the leaders of Hamas and Israel.
And of course, we also spoke to the relative of someone who was killed in those attacks on the 7th of October. And there are many families of people who are still being held hostage who want their loved ones to return home as well. My last question to you, Ambassador, is what leverage do you think the US realistically has over Israel in all of this?
Well, the U.S. has been adamant about the importance of the return of the hostages from the beginning. The president's been very steady on that. Right now, it appears that neither the prime minister nor the head of Hamas is interested in a cessation of this conflict. Either one of them, and Hamas in particular, should have stepped up with a clear acceptance of the ceasefire. But the reality is neither side has. As far as the hostages are concerned, we heard the president say, we will have to see what he does, that if the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas did not go forward, that the United States would see about whether a separate deal could be done via the United States. And we'll see if he follows through on that.
OK, thank you so much, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, bringing us your thoughts and analysis on our main story.